Chapter 5. The Glowworm. Section 1. His surgical instrument. Few insects enjoy more fame than the glowworm, the curious little animal who celebrates the joy of life by lighting a lantern at its tail end. We all know it, at least by name, even if we have not seen it roaming through the grass, like a spark fallen from the full moon. The Greeks of old called it the bright-tailed, and modern science gives it the name Lampyris. As a matter of fact, the Lampyris is not a worm at all, not even in general appearance. He has 6 short legs, which he well knows how to use, for he is a real gadabout. The male, when he is full grown, has wing cases like the true beetle that he is. The female is an unattractive creature who knows nothing of the delights of flying, and all her life remains in the larva, or incomplete form. Even at this stage, the word worm is out of place. We French use the phrase naked as a worm to express the lack of any kind of protection. Now the Lampyris is clothed. That is to say, he wears an outer skin that serves as a defense, and he is, moreover, rather richly colored. He is dark brown, with pale pink on the chest, and each segment or division of his body is ornamented at the edge with 2 spots of fairly bright red. A costume like this was never worn by a worm. Nevertheless, we will continue to call him the glowworm, since it is by that name that he is best known to the world. The 2 most interesting peculiarities about the glowworm are, first, the way he secures his food, and secondly, the lantern at his tail. A famous Frenchman, a master of the science of food, once said, "Show me what you eat, and I will tell you what you are." A similar question should be addressed to every insect whose habits we propose to study, for the information supplied by food is the chief of all the documents of animal life. Well, in spite of his innocent appearance, the glowworm is an eater of flesh, a hunter of game, and he carries on his hunting with rare villainy. His regular prey is the snail. This fact has long been known, but what is not so well known is his curious method of attack, of which I have seen no other example anywhere. Before he begins to feed on his victim, he gives it an anesthetic. He makes it unconscious, as a person is made unconscious with chloroform before a surgical operation. His food, as a rule, is a certain small snail, hardly the size of a cherry, which collects in clusters during the hot weather on the stiff stubble and other dry stalks by the roadside, and there remains motionless, in profound meditation, throughout the scorching summer days. In some such places as this, I have often seen the glowworm feasting on his unconscious prey, which he had just paralyzed on its shaky support. But he frequents other places too. At the edge of cool, damp ditches, where the vegetation is varied, many snails are to be found, and in such spots as these the glowworm can kill his victim on the ground. I can reproduce these conditions at home and can follow the operator's performance down to the smallest detail. I will try to describe this strange sight. I place a little grass in a wide glass jar. In this I install a few glowworms and a supply of snails of a suitable size, neither too large nor too small. One must be patient and wait, and above all keep a careful watch, for the events take place unexpectedly and do not last long. For a moment the glowworm examines his prey, which, according to its habit, is completely hidden in the shell except for the edge of the mantle, which projects slightly. Then the hunter draws his weapon. It is a very simple weapon, but it cannot be seen without a magnifying glass. It consists of 2 mandibles, bent back into a hook, very sharp and as thin as a hair. Through the microscope one can see a slender groove running down the hook. And that is all. The insect repeatedly taps the snail's mantle with its instrument. It all happens with such gentleness as to suggest kisses rather than bites. As children, teasing one another, we used to talk of tweaks to express a slight squeeze of the fingertips, something more like tickling than a serious pinch. Let us use that word. In conversation with animals, language loses nothing by remaining simple. The glowworm gives tweaks to the snail. He doles them out methodically, without hurrying, and takes a brief rest after each of them, as though to find out what effect has been produced. The number of tweaks is not great. Half a dozen at most, which are enough to make the snail motionless and to rob him of all feeling. That other pinches are administered later, at the time of eating, seems very likely, but I cannot say anything for certain on that subject. The first few, however, there are never many, are enough to prevent the snail from feeling anything, thanks to the promptitude of the glowworm, who at lightning speed darts some kind of poison into his victim by means of his grooved hooks. There is no doubt at all that the snail is made insensible to pain. If, when the glowworm has dealt some 4 or 5 of his twitches, I take away the victim and prick it with a fine needle, there is not a quiver in the wounded flesh. There is not the smallest sign of life. Moreover, I occasionally chance to see snails attacked by the lampiris while they are creeping along the ground, the foot slowly crawling, the tentacles swollen to their full extent. A few disordered movements betray a brief excitement on the part of the snail, and then everything ceases. The foot no longer crawls, the front part loses its graceful curve, the tentacles become limp and give way under their own weight, dangling feebly like a broken stick. The snail, to all appearances, is dead. He is not, however, really dead. I can bring him to life again when he has been for 2 or 3 days in a condition that is neither life nor death. I give him a shower bath. In about a couple of days, my prisoner, so lately injured by the glowworm's treachery, is restored to his usual state. He revives, he recovers movement and sensibility. He is affected by the touch of a needle. He shifts his place, crawls, puts out his tentacles, as though nothing unusual had occurred. The general torpor, a sort of deep drunkenness, has vanished outright. The dead returns to life. Human science did not invent the art of making a person insensible to pain, which is one of the triumphs of surgery. Far back in the centuries, the glowworm, and apparently others too, was practicing it. The surgeon makes us breathe the fumes of ether or chloroform. The insect darts forth from his fangs very tiny doses of a special poison. When we consider the harmless and peaceful nature of the snail, it seems curious that the glowworm should require this remarkable talent. But I think I know the reason. When the snail is on the ground, creeping, or even shrunk into his shell, the attack never presents any difficulty. The shell possesses no lid and leaves the hermit's forepart to a great extent exposed. But it very often happens that he is in a raised position, clinging to the tip of a grass stalk or perhaps to the smooth surface of a stone. This support to which he fastens himself serves very well as a protection. It acts as a lid, supposing that the shell fits closely on the stone or stalk. But if the least bit of the snail be left uncovered, the slender hooks of the glowworm can find their way in through the gap, and in a moment the victim is made unconscious and can be eaten in comfort. Now, if a snail perched on top of a stalk is very easily upset, the slightest struggle, the feeblest wriggle on his part, would dislodge him. He would fall to the ground, and the glowworm would be left without food. It is necessary for the snail to be made instantly unconscious of pain, or he would escape, and it must be done with a touch so delicate that it does not shake him from his stalk. And that, I think, is why the glowworm possesses his strange surgical instrument. Section 2. His rosette. The glowworm not only makes his victim insensible while he is poised on the side of a dry grass stalk, but he eats him in the same dangerous position. And his preparations for his meal are by no means simple. What is his manner of consuming it? Does he really eat? That is to say, does he divide his food into pieces? Does he carve it into minute particles, which are afterwards ground by a chewing apparatus? I think not. I never see a trace of solid nourishment on my captives' mouths. The glowworm does not eat in the strict sense of the word. He merely drinks. He feeds on a thin gruel, into which he transforms his prey. Like the flesh-eating grub of the fly, he can digest his food before he swallows it. He turns his prey into liquid before feeding on it. This is how things happen. A snail has been made insensible by a glowworm, who is nearly always alone, even when the prize is a large one like the common snail. Soon a number of guests hasten up, 2, 3, or more, and, without any quarrel with the real owner, all alike fall to. A couple of days later, if I turn the shell so that the opening is downwards, the contents flow out like soup from a saucepan. By the time the meal is finished, only insignificant remains are left. The matter is obvious. By repeated tiny bites, similar to the tweaks which we saw administered at the beginning, The flesh of the snail is converted into a gruel on which the various guests nourish themselves each in his own way, each working at the broth by means of some special pepsin or digestive fluid, and each taking his own mouthfuls of it. The use of this method shows that the glowworm's mouth must be very feebly armed, apart from the two fangs which sting the patient and inject the poison. No doubt these fangs at the same time inject some other substance which turns the solid flesh into liquid in such a thorough way that every morsel is turned to account. And this is done with exquisite delicacy, though sometimes in a position that is anything but steady. The snails imprisoned in my apparatus sometimes crawl up to the top, which is closed with a glass pane. To this pane, they fix themselves with a speck of the sticky substance they carry with them. But as they are miserly in their use of this substance, the merest shake is enough to loosen the shell and send it to the bottom of the jar. Now it is not unusual for the glowworm to hoist himself to the top with the help of a certain climbing organ that makes up for the weakness of his legs. He selects his prey, makes a careful inspection of it to find a slit, nibbles it a little, makes it insensible, and then, without delay, proceeds to prepare the gruel which he will go on eating for days on end. When he has finished his meal, the shell is found to be absolutely empty. And yet this shell, which was fixed to the glass only by the slight smear of stickiness, has not come loose, nor even shifted its position in the smallest degree. Without any protest from the hermit who has been gradually converted into broth, it has been drained dry on the very spot at which the first attack was made. These small details show us how promptly the anesthetic bite takes effect and how very skillfully the glowworm treats his snail. To do all this, poised high in air on a sheet of glass or a grass stem, the glowworm must have some special limb or organ to keep him from slipping. It is plain that his short, clumsy legs are not enough. Through the magnifying glass, we can see that he does indeed possess a special organ of this kind. Beneath his body, towards the tail, there is a white spot. The glass shows that this is composed of about a dozen short, fleshy little tubes or stumpy fingers, which are sometimes gathered into a cluster, sometimes spread into a rosette. This bunch of little fingers helps the glowworm to stick to a smooth surface and also to climb. If he wishes to fix himself to a pane of glass or a stalk, he opens his rosette and spreads it wide on the support, to which it clings by its own natural stickiness. And by opening and shutting alternately, it helps him to creep along and to climb. The little fingers that form this rosette are not jointed, but are able to move in all directions. Indeed, they are more like tubes than fingers, for they cannot seize anything, they can only hold on by their stickiness. They are very useful, however, for they have a third purpose besides their powers of clinging and climbing. They are used as a sponge and brush. At a moment of rest, after a meal, the glowworm passes and repasses this brush over his head and sides and his whole body, a performance made possible by the flexibility of his spine. This is done point by point, from one end of the body to the other, with a scrupulous care that proves the great interest he takes in the operation. At first one may wonder why he should dust and polish himself so carefully. But no doubt, by the time he has turned the snail into gruel inside the shell and has then spent several days in eating the result of his labors, a wash and brush up is not amiss. Section 3. His lamp. If the glowworm possessed no other talent than that of chloroforming his prey by means of a few tweaks as gentle as kisses, he would be unknown to the world in general. But he also knows how to light himself like a lantern. He shines, which is an excellent manner of becoming famous. In the case of the female glowworm, the lighting apparatus occupies the last 3 divisions of the body. On each of the first 2, it takes the form, on the undersurface, of a wide belt of light. On the 3rd division, or segment, the bright part is much smaller and consists only of 2 spots which shine through the back and are visible both above and below the animal. From these belts and spots there comes a glorious white light, delicately tinged with blue. The male glowworm carries only the smaller of these lamps, the 2 spots on the end segment, which are possessed by the entire tribe. These luminous spots appear upon the young grub and continue throughout life unchanged, and they are always visible both on the upper and lower surface, whereas the 2 large belts peculiar to the female shine only below the body. I have examined the shining belt under the microscope. On the skin, a sort of whitewash is spread, formed of some very fine, grain-like substance, which is the source of the light. Closed beside, it is a curious air tube, with a short, wide stem leading to a kind of bushy tuft of delicate branches. These branches spread over the sheet of shining matter and sometimes dip into it. It is plain to me that the brightness is produced by the breathing organs of the glowworm. There are certain substances which, when mixed with air, become luminous or even burst into flame. Such substances are called combustible, and the act of their producing light or flame by mingling with the air is called oxidation. The lamp of the glowworm is the result of oxidation. The substance that looks like whitewash is the matter that is oxidized, and the air is supplied by the tube connected with the glowworm's breathing organs. But as to the nature of the shining substance, no one as yet knows anything. We are better informed as regards another question. We know that the glowworm has complete control of the light he carries. He can turn it up or down or out, as he pleases. If the flow of air through the tube is increased, the light becomes more intense. If the same air tube, influenced by the will of the animal, stops the passage of air, the light grows fainter or even goes out. Excitement produces an effect upon the air tube. I am speaking now of the modest fairy lamp, the spots on the last segment of the glowworm's body. These are suddenly and almost completely put out by any kind of flurry. When I am hunting for young glowworms, I can plainly see them glimmering on the blades of grass. But should the least false step disturb a neighboring twig, the light goes out at once, and the insect becomes invisible. The gorgeous belts of the females, however, are very little, if at all, affected by even the most violent surprise. I fire a gun, for instance, beside a wire gauze cage in which I am rearing a menagerie of female glowworms in the open air. The explosion produces no result. The illumination continues, as bright and placid as before. I take a spray and rain down a slight shower of cold water upon the flock. Not one of my animals puts out its light. At the very most, there is a brief pause in the radiance, and then only in some cases. I send a puff of smoke from my pipe into the cage. This time the pause is more marked. There are even some lamps put out, but they are soon relit. Calm returns, and the light is as bright as ever. I take some of the captives in my fingers and tease them a little. Yet the illumination is not much dimmed if I do not press too hard with my thumb. Nothing short of very serious reasons would make the insect put out its signals altogether. All things considered, there is not a doubt but that the glowworm himself manages his lighting apparatus, extinguishing and rekindling it at will. But there is one circumstance over which the insect has no control. If I cut off a strip of the skin, showing one of the luminous belts, and place it in a glass tube, it will shine away merrily, though not quite as brilliantly as on the living body. The presence of life is unnecessary, because the luminous skin is in direct contact with the air, and the flow of oxygen through the air tube is therefore not required. In aerated water, the skin shines as brightly as in the free air, but the light is extinguished in water that has been deprived of its air by boiling. There could be no better proof that the glowworm's light is the effect of oxidation. The light is white, calm, and soft to the eyes, and suggests a spark dropped by the full moon. In spite of its splendor, it is very feeble. If we move a glowworm along a line of print, in perfect darkness, we can easily make out the letters one by one, and even words when they are not too long. But nothing is visible beyond this very narrow zone. A lantern of this kind soon tires the reader's patience. These brilliant creatures know nothing at all of family affection. They lay their eggs anywhere, or rather strew them at random, either on the earth or on a blade of grass. Then they pay no further attention to them. From start to finish, the glowworm shines. Even the eggs are luminous, and so are the grubs. At the approach of cold weather, the latter go down into the ground, but not very far. If I dig them up, I find them with their little stern lights still shining. Even below the soil, they keep their lanterns bravely alight.